Welcome to the Interstellar Stories channel. In today's video, we're going to dive deep into a topic. Everyone will be seasoned with fire, and every sacrifice will be seasoned with salt, declares Jesus in Mark 9:49. The ESV and NIV say salted with fire, rather than seasoned with salt. Whatever the translation, the theme emphasizes the high cost of discipleship, that Christians will be purged by the fire of suffering. A disciple of Jesus who practices self-denial is ready to offer themselves as a willing sacrifice to God, just as salt was used to prepare a sacrifice. Salt was utilized in religious sacrifices back in antiquity. For instance, the Israelites were told to season all of their grain sacrifices with salt in Leviticus 2:13, which contains this instruction: "You must include salt in all of your gifts. You cannot allow the salt of your covenant with God to be absent from your grain offering." This Old Testament custom exemplifies the use of salt as a preservation and purifying tool. Jesus in Mark 9:49 alludes to the Old Testament practice of sacrifices being seasoned with salt. His point is that his followers are sacrifices to God. Believers will be preserved. Those who follow Christ are willing to give up anything that would hinder their relationship to the Lord, even if it means they must lose a hand, Mark 9:43, a foot, verse 45, or an eye, verse 47. One commentator explains it this way: the word fire here denotes self-denials, sacrifices, trials, in keeping ourselves from the gratification of the flesh. As if Jesus had said, "Look at the sacrifice on the altar. It is an offering to God, about to be presented to Him. It is sprinkled with salt, emblematic of purity, of preservation, and of fitting it therefore for a sacrifice." So you are devoted to God. You are sacrifices, victims, offerings to Him in His service. To make you acceptable offerings, everything must be done to preserve you from sin and to purify you. Self-denials, subduing the lusts, enduring trials, removing offenses, are the proper preservatives in the service of God. In the lives of Christians, God may also season them with salt by allowing them to go through various forms of hardship. God calls us to this because Christ likewise suffered for you, setting you an example so that you may follow in His footsteps. God does not want for us to perish, but rather to mold us into the likeness of His Son, Jesus Christ. Sincere disciples are willing to pay the price of discipleship and make the drastic sacrifices necessary to follow Christ. They might be thought of as God's sacrifices being made ready for the altar. Jesus' teachings serve as a reminder to followers of His to strive for virtue and refrain from sin. God gives us the ability to be seasoned with salt, so that sin does not take control of our lives once more. Jesus invites us to follow Him by referring to the Old Testament offerings as being seasoned with salt. God cleanses Christians of sin and keeps them safe from harm, much like salt preserves and purifies food. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect, says the Apostle Paul, outlining how we might offer ourselves to God as living sacrifices.